Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where bread isn't just warm comfort on the table, it's survival itself, and it might just kill you faster than hunger ever could. Imagine stepping through the creaking wooden door of a Victorian bakery, the floorboards sticky with dough scraps, and the smell of yeast so thick it feels like a second skin. But before you take that first deep, satisfying breath, hold on. The air is heavy with flour, floating in clouds so fine you can't see them until they coat your eyelashes and settle in your lungs. Breathe too deeply and congratulations, you've just inhaled the dust that could scar your chest for life. You probably won't survive this shift, let alone the job. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far and wide this little community stretches across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge deeper into the bakery, the dim oil lamps flickering, casting shadows that look like they might be watching you back. The ovens roar against the far wall, fueled by endless buckets of coal. The flames flare, throwing heat so intense your skin feels roasted before you've even touched the bread. Your shirt clings, sweat already soaking through, but you don't dare slow down. There's dough to knead, loaves to score, and customers who expect their daily bread by dawn. The work is relentless. You lift, you fold, you slap the dough against the bench, your arms aching with each repetition. It's a workout no Victorian gym could ever match, except here. The weights are made of sticky flour and sweat, not polished steel. But the real enemy isn't the backbreaking labor, it's the invisible storm swirling around you. Flour dust is everywhere, on the counters, in the cracks of the wooden ceiling, even on the eyelashes of your fellow bakers who look ghostly pale, like they've been dipped in chalk. You laugh for a second at the sight. One coworker sneezes and creates a tiny blizzard in the room, but then it hits you. That dust doesn't just vanish. It slides into your lungs, scrapes the delicate tissue, and refuses to leave. Historians still argue whether bakers knew just how deadly their workplace was, but the coughing, the wheezing, and the premature deaths weren't exactly subtle clues. You keep working though, because bread isn't a luxury in Victorian Britain, it's life itself. Families spend more than half their wages just to buy loaves, and without you slogging through this fog, the streets outside would be even hungrier, noisier, more desperate. That's the cruel joke. Your job is essential, yet it's killing you in slow motion. The irony tastes bitter, almost as bitter as the soot-laced crusts cooling on the shelves. You pull a loaf from the oven, its crust browned and crackling in the flicker of firelight, and for a moment you allow yourself to admire it, the smell, the shape, the sense of creation in your hands. But the truth is, this bread isn't quite what it looks like. It's been tampered with, stretched, powdered, and doctored until the golden loaf is less about nourishment and more about illusion. Victorian Britain was obsessed with white bread. Darker loaves made from wholemeal flour were often seen as food for the poor, or worse, for animals. Everyone wanted that snowy, pristine crumb, but the problem was simple. Fine white flour cost more money and more labor to produce. So bakers took shortcuts. You'd mix in alum powder, a chalky chemical additive that bleached flour to a bright, ghostly white. Customers loved it. Their bread looked cleaner, softer, more refined. Never mind that alum burned in the stomach like a bad secret. Eat enough of it, and you could expect cramps, diarrhea, or long-term health problems. But who's counting when the loaf looks beautiful? You toss flour on the bench and realize that flour isn't always just flour either. To make loaves bulkier, unscrupulous bakers add ground chalk, plaster, even mashed up bones. Yes, bones. Picture that the next time you admire a loaf's hearty weight. The idea was to give poor families more bread for their pennies, but it came at a price. Your gut became a testing ground for Victorian chemistry experiments. Historians still argue whether bakers were ignorant of the damage, or simply too desperate to care. The worst part, you eat this bread too, not because you want to, but because it's what's left at the end of the shift. Crusts burned too dark, loaves shaped too lopsided, those become your dinner. And though you know what went into them, hunger doesn't leave much room for picky choices. You chew, your jaw working slowly, trying not to think of the alum scraping your insides. The bakery's regulars line up outside, shivering in the morning fog, clutching coins tight in their hands. Mothers with infants, factory men on their way to the mill, children dragging empty baskets that smell faintly of yesterday's bread. They want the cleanest, whitest loaf they can afford. And you provide it, smiling weakly as you hand over a product you know is part nourishment, part poison. A fringe tidbit floats through your weary mind. In some places, alum wasn't just used in bread, it was rubbed on skin to reduce sweating, or sprinkled as a deodorant before formal dinners. Imagine the same powder you smear on your armpits is the one people bake into their family's dinner, and you're the one delivering it. A joke comes to you. At least no one in Victorian Britain could complain about bread being too organic. Still, not all customers are fooled. Rumors creep through the neighborhoods about bakers who stretch their flour, and scandals occasionally flare when someone gets sick. You overhear whispers in the queue. One woman swears her neighbor wasted away after a steady diet of white loaves. Another mutters that chalk must be the culprit. But the line doesn't shorten. Hunger and habit override suspicion. And so you keep dusting the counter, rolling the dough, sprinkling in the powder that keeps business afloat. You feel complicit, guilty even, but also trapped. Without the tricks, your loaves would look dingy, less desirable, and you'd be out of work. Bread is supposed to sustain life, but here in the bakery, you know better. It's just another dangerous illusion in a city already choking on its own smoke and soot. The oven's heat roars behind you, but it's the equipment around you that hides the crueler danger. Wooden paddles, flour-streaked counters, iron scales, all simple, functional. Yet tucked among them are tools with a secret bite, lead-lined rollers and lead pans. You probably don't notice at first. The heavy rollers feel solid, reliable, perfect for smoothing and shaping dough. The pans bake evenly, leaving loaves golden on the outside and fluffy inside. It all seems practical, even ingenious, but each batch carries a ghost ingredient you'll never see. Lead, that soft, silvery metal humans have played with for centuries. Romans once piped their water through it, thinking it clever. Now in Victorian bakeries, it's back again, disguised as convenience. As dough passes over rollers or rests inside pans, tiny traces leach into the mix. You can't taste it, can't smell it, and certainly can't complain about it. It's invisible poison, baked right into the staple of everyday life. You rub your flour-caked hands on your apron and wonder how many loaves are tainted. Probably all of them. Families outside line up, blissfully unaware, breaking bread at their tables, feeding it to children. Slowly, silently, lead creeps into their bodies, dulling minds, sapping energy and sometimes sparking seizures. Historians still argue whether bakers themselves understood the risks, or if lead's subtle damage was too easily dismissed as ordinary sickness. There's a bitter irony in your own role. You aren't immune, your body takes the same hits. Your skin sometimes tingles with odd numbness after handling the heavy pans. On bad days, headaches pound behind your eyes like drums beating out of rhythm. You joke with your fellow bakers that it's just the flour hangover, but deep down, you wonder if it's something worse. A quirky tidbit flickers through your tired thoughts. In some households, lead wasn't just hiding in bread, it was painted onto toys, woven into fabrics, even added to cosmetics. Imagine your customers, mothers dabbing lead-based powder on their faces to look pale and elegant, then handing their children bread baked in lead pans. Breakfast and beauty, both with a matching toxic core. The government doesn't step in, not yet. Bread is too important, too central. Investigations are whispered about, but enforcement is rare. Inspectors have bigger scandals to chase. Milk diluted with chalk water, candies dyed with arsenic, even beer laced with strychnine. Compared to those nightmares, a little lead in bread hardly seems urgent, or so the logic goes. You roll another sheet of dough, the rhythm mechanical, your arms aching with fatigue. Each pass of the roller makes you complicit in this quiet poisoning. And yet the bakery thrives. Customers judge your bread by its whiteness, its fluffiness, its pleasing weight in the hand, not by the invisible spectre woven through its crumb. You find yourself caught between pride and guilt, baking loaves that both sustain and sabotage the city's appetite. You laugh softly at the absurdity. Bread is supposed to be the staff of life, yet in your world, it doubles as a weapon of slow, deliberate sabotage. And you're the one wielding it, though you never asked to. The deadly tools of your trade rest against the counter, shining faintly in the lamplight, and you keep working, shoulders slumped, wondering how many years you have before the weight of those invisible traces catches up with you. The street outside is still and silent when you arrive. The gas lamps cast weak halos, and the fog curls low, wrapping around your ankles as you push open the bakery door. Midnight. While most of the city sleeps, you begin the long grind. The ovens must be stoked, dough mixed, loaves shaped, all before the first rooster crows. If bread isn't ready when customers wake, you might as well close the shop. Your body resists at first. Eyes heavy, stomach unsettled, muscles aching from yesterday's labor, but routine takes over. You haul sacks of flour from the storeroom, each one weighing nearly as much as you do, and slam them down with a thud. The dust explodes upward, filling your nose and throat, a dry reminder that the day, your day, has begun. You fold, you slap dough against the bench until the rhythm hypnotizes you. Hours blur, marked only by the thump of your hands and the occasional hiss of the ovens. Your body clock doesn't know what to do. You should be asleep, but instead you're sweating in front of flames. When you finally stumble out into the dawn, the world feels off balance. The birds sing, but to you their song marks bedtime. You sleep when you can, collapsed on a cot in the corner, or face down on the table, cheek pressed into a pile of flour. It's not rest, not really. It's survival in scraps. This schedule bends you until you nearly snap. Historians still argue whether bakers worked the most grueling hours in Victorian trades, but you know the truth from the inside. You envy factory workers with regular shifts, miners who at least see daylight. Your time is owned by bread, your nights stolen by dough. A quirky tidbit floats into your weary mind. Some bakers tried to combat fatigue by chewing coca leaves or sipping black tea so strong it could strip paint. The stimulants helped briefly, but they left nerves rattled and hearts pounding like runaway trains. You chuckle at the thought, Victorian bakers, pioneers of the all-nighter long before college students claimed the crown. The toll shows in your body, fingers cracked, nails rimmed black from soot, knees swollen from hours of standing, dark circles so deep under your eyes you look bruised. Your friends joke you resemble the bread itself, pale, puffy, and marked with strange lines. Humor is all you have to fight the exhaustion, and even that feels brittle. Customers never see this side. To them, you're just the cheerful worker handing over warm loaves. They don't notice the wobble in your stance, or the way your hands tremble when you give them change. They don't hear the shallow breaths, don't see the nights that blend endlessly into days. They simply bite into their bread, never imagining the midnight grind that put it on their table. And so you continue, shaping dough as time dissolves, watching hours vanish into flour clouds, your body running on fumes. The bakery demands sacrifice, and you pay in sleep, in health, in years of your life. There's no clock-out whistle, no weekend respite, just the endless cycle, night into bread, bread into morning, morning into night again. The ovens roar as if alive, each one a gaping furnace hungry for coal. You shovel fuel into the firebox, and a wave of heat slams into your body like a blacksmith's forge. Sweat bursts from your skin instantly, dripping into your eyes, stinging, salty. You wipe it away with the back of your flour-caked hand, which leaves a sticky paste smeared across your face. Welcome to seasoning number 1, your own perspiration. But the real flavor in this bread doesn't come from you. It comes from the fuel. Coal, endless, dirty, choking coal. The flames hiss and spit, sending soot spiraling upward to mingle with the bread. You don't even flinch anymore when ash drifts into the dough. It's part of the recipe, unwritten but understood. The bread tastes faintly of smoke. The crust darkens unnaturally, and families who buy it chew without a thought, accustomed to the flavor of coal, just as they're accustomed to the flavor of poverty. You know it isn't harmless. Every shift, your lungs claw against the air, filling with sulfurous grit. The bakery walls are blackened, ceilings streaked with oily residue that drips down like candle wax. Historians still argue whether bakers died more from flour or from soot, but either way, you're breathing poison daily. There's a bitterly comic thought you cling to. While rich households dine on clean loaves baked in wood-fired ovens, you and your customers chew on coal-seasoned crusts. It's like fine dining versus fast food, but in this case, the fast food comes with the added bonus of lung disease. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk despite yourself. In some bakeries, rats fattened on flour scraps would crawl into the warm corners of ovens, and their charred remains flavored the next day's bread. Protein boost, Victorian style, bon appetit. Your co-workers joke to survive the stench. One calls it London's perfume, another shrugs and says, at least it's free spice. You laugh too, because what else can you do? If you don't, the weight of the soot pressing on your chest might crush more than just your lungs. The customers never taste the difference, not really, or maybe they do but have no choice. Hunger is stronger than complaint. Children gnaw at crusts with black crumbs clinging to their lips. Factory men tear chunks with coal-stained hands. Housewives dunk slices into weak tea, watching the water turn grey. Nobody spits it out. Nobody demands better. Bread is bread, no matter what else comes baked into it. You feel the grit coating your tongue, clogging your throat. You cough, doubling over, and a fellow baker claps you on the back, sending another puff of flour and soot into the air. The cycle continues. Shovel coal, breathe soot, bake bread. The ovens eat, the city eats, and you're left hollowed out, choking on the invisible seasoning that never washes away. You pause to catch your breath, leaning against the flour-dusted counter, but the air betrays you. With every inhale, a storm of fine white particles rushes into your lungs, sharp and soft at the same time, like breathing powdered glass. The smell of yeast and warm bread almost tricks you into thinking it's harmless, but your chest tightens and you cough until your ribs ache. Welcome to the baker's true disease, what doctors of the day call baker's lung. You don't need a medical degree to know something's wrong. The wheeze in your chest grows louder at night when you try to sleep. The coughing fits wake you dry and hacking, your throat raw. Sometimes your spit comes up tinged with grey, as though your lungs themselves are turning into dough. Historians still argue whether Victorian bakers understood the connection, but the evidence is right there in your body, carved into every shallow breath. The flour clings to everything. Your eyelashes look frosted, your hair powdered white long before age claims it, your clothes stiff with dust. Even your sweat turns to paste, streaking your arms in chalky lines. Children who peek into the bakery giggle and call you a ghost, but the joke cuts close to the truth. You are being erased by flour from the inside out. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind as you mop your brow. Flour dust is so combustible that in rare cases, bakeries have exploded when a spark hit the air. Imagine that, working not only with poison but inside a giant powder keg. You laugh weakly to yourself, muttering, well, at least that would be quick. The doctor, if you ever see one, prescribes rest, fresh air, and perhaps a tonic of cod liver oil. You don't have time for rest, nor money for cod liver oil. Instead, you cough into a rag and keep kneading, each movement driving pain deeper into your chest. You hear your fellow bakers hacking too, the sound like a sad chorus echoing across the room. Some are younger than you, already stooped, their breath short, their eyes ringed with fatigue. Customers never notice. They see the loaves, not the lungs that birthed them. They inhale the comforting aroma of fresh bread, never realizing it's the same dust suffocating you behind the counter. Families praise your work, bless your skill, even joke that you must be healthy from all that good bread, if only they knew. You wipe your face with your apron, leaving streaks of flour across your cheek, and get back to work. The dough doesn't knead itself, the ovens don't stoke themselves, and the customers won't wait. The cycle continues, each breath shaving years from your life. You wonder briefly how many loaves you've baked, and how many breaths you'll have left to take. Your stomach growls as you slide another tray of loaves into the oven. The irony never leaves you, surrounded by food, yet half-starved yourself. You don't earn enough to buy more than scraps, and what you do eat is often the bread customers reject. Burned crusts, misshapen lumps, loaves gone stale by morning. They fill your belly, yes, but never quite silence the hunger. Bread is life for the city, but for you it's a cruel joke. Your pay barely covers rent in a crowded room where the walls are damp and the air stinks of sewage. Meat, a rare luxury. Vegetables, expensive in winter. You chew hard bread dipped in thin broth, dreaming of roast beef you'll never taste. Sometimes you gnaw through a crust so tough you think your teeth might crack, but it's either that or nothing. The bakery feeds everyone except the baker. The shifts stretch endlessly, 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours. Your back aches, your arms burn, your feet swell inside boots dusted white with flour. You don't have time to rest, and when you do, it's usually on a flour sack in the corner, curled up like a cat. Sleep is shallow, broken by the clang of pans, the hiss of steam, or your own coughing fits. Historians still argue whether bakers were the most exploited of Victorian workers, but to you, it feels like your body has been mortgaged to the ovens. A quirky tidbit comes to mind as you slump against the bench. Bakers were sometimes forbidden to eat too much of the bread they made, under suspicion they might steal profits. Imagine that, policed hunger, in a room filled with loaves. Some masters locked away the fresh bread, rationing out scraps like a cruel reward system. You laugh bitterly, the smell alone is enough torture. And yet, even in your weakness, the work doesn't stop. Customers arrive at dawn, coins clinking in their hands, faces pinched with hunger of their own. They don't know your ribs show beneath your shirt, or that your energy is a thin thread ready to snap. They see only the bread, golden and comforting, and they hand over their wages gratefully. You push through fatigue with grim determination. Each loaf you need feels heavier, each motion slower. But pride creeps in despite everything. You're starving, yes, but you're also feeding a city. You're weak, yes, but without your labor, the neighborhood would go hungry. The paradox gnaws at you, both essential and expendable, both creator and victim. As you collapse onto your cot after another endless shift, your stomach hollow and your body broken, you can't help but smirk. Bread might be called the staff of life, but in your world it's a staff that beats you down even as it props others up. The first whispers begin in the marketplace. A mother mutters that her child grew sick after eating a loaf too pale, too chalky. A factory man swears his belly cramps are worse since switching bakers. Rumors spread as quickly as flour dust. Bread isn't safe, bread is poisoned, bakers are cheating. Soon the newspapers catch the scent, and suddenly your trade is dragged into the spotlight. The headlines scream with outrage, poison in the loaf, bold type accusing bakers of selling death disguised as food. Investigative journalists describe the additives, alum, chalk, plaster. They write of lead pans leaching into dough and of bakeries so filthy rats wander across the counters like they own the place. They paint you as a villain, a fraud poisoning the poor while hiding behind a smile. You cringe reading it, flour still under your fingernails, knowing that much of it is true. Scandals erupt across the city. Families gather at corners, clutching loaves suspiciously, sniffing them as though poison has a smell. Some customers boycott bakeries entirely, turning instead to cheaper street food or home baking, though few have the skill or money to sustain it. Bread riots break out when prices rise, crowds smashing windows, demanding purity and fairness. Historians still argue whether these scandals exaggerated the danger or revealed a genuine epidemic, but either way, the public is furious. Authorities step in reluctantly. Inspectors wander into bakeries, poking flour sacks with sticks, sniffing at dough, scribbling in notebooks. Sometimes they find bakers, sometimes they turn a blind eye, depending on who greased whose palm. Reformers call for purity laws, claiming bread should be sacred, untouched by deceit. Bakers like you stand at the center of the storm, trapped between survival and condemnation. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity. Customers who once demanded the whitest bread possible now shout that whiteness itself is suspicious. They want loaves darker, heavier, natural, the very bread they scorned before. A quirky tidbit reaches your ears. Some bakers began selling loaves deliberately darkened, branding them as honest bread. Imagine that, burning crusts on purpose to prove purity. The scandals shake your routine. Each knock on the door could be an inspector, each customer a potential accuser. Some mutter curses as they hand over coins, others demand to know whether you use alum. You answer carefully, evasively, because the truth is complicated. If you stop whitening loaves, you'll lose business. If you continue, you risk fines or worse. Every batch feels like a gamble, and the stakes are your livelihood. At night, as you collapse after another shift, your chest rattling with coughs, you wonder which will kill you first: the poisons you bake or the scandal that brands you a criminal. Either way, bread, the thing that was supposed to nourish and sustain, is eating you alive, one crust at a time. The tide begins to shift. Outrage has a way of forcing change, even in the slow, soot-choked gears of Victorian society. Reformers rise from the noise: journalists, doctors, activists, each demanding safer food and fairer practices. Pamphlets circulate, warning families of the dangers hidden in the loaf, urging them to demand bread untainted by chalk or alum. Some scientists set up demonstrations in public halls, showing crowds how to test a slice with vinegar to reveal its false whiteness. You watch the fervor spread, both relieved and uneasy. Relief, because maybe the burden of deception won't rest entirely on your shoulders. Uneasy, because reform usually means disruption, and disruption rarely favors the worker. Parliament debates the first tentative steps toward food regulation. Inspectors grow bolder, their visits more frequent, their fines heavier. The talk of adulteration becomes commonplace, and suddenly bread is not just bread, it's politics, morality, even identity. Historians still argue whether these reforms were driven more by genuine concern for public health or by the Victorian obsession with respectability. Either way, the effect is real. Bakers like you must change or be swept aside. You try to adapt. Alum is risky now, chalk even riskier. Some bakers turn to mechanical sifters. Hopping finer flour will impress customers without additives. Others switch to darker loaves and rebrand them as wholesome, leaning into the new trend of purity. But the cost of true ingredients rises, and customers balk at higher prices. You stand in the middle, trying to balance honesty with survival, every decision a gamble. There's a quirky tidbit in the reformers' fight. Some propose that every bakery should hang a sign in its window reading, "Pure bread sold here." It sounds noble, but of course it sparked a wave of dishonesty. Bakers posted the signs whether or not their bread was pure. You chuckle bitterly. In a city built on soot and illusion, truth is just another marketing trick. Change trickles slowly. Some customers welcome the reforms, praising the new loaves, while others mutter that the honest bread tastes worse than the old doctored kind. You hear them complain outside. Bring back the alum, it was softer on the teeth. You can't help but laugh, coughing midway through, at the irony of people begging for poison once it's gone. Through it all, you keep kneading, shaping, and baking, though your body feels weaker each year. The reforms may save future generations, but for you the damage is already done. Your lungs ache, your joints throb, your stomach churns from years of chalky crusts eaten in desperation. Still, you cling to a flicker of pride. Maybe, just maybe, you've lived through the worst of it, and the loaves leaving your hands now are cleaner than before. Cleaner, if not safe. The shadows of reform stretch long across your bench, promising change but leaving you uncertain. Will the baker's trade survive at all? Or will it be reshaped entirely, with machines and regulations sweeping away the old ways? You don't know. You only know that tomorrow before dawn you'll be back in the bakery, shoveling coal and coughing through flour dust, praying the reforms catch up fast enough to matter. The years wear on, each one layering exhaustion, soot, and flour dust like sediment in your body. You've survived scandals, reforms, and the constant grind of night into dawn, and somehow you're still here. Shuffling through the bakery with the same ritualistic precision. Your hands are calloused, your lungs wheezy, your back curved, yet there's a strange pride buried beneath the fatigue. Each loaf you shape carries your sweat, your toil, and the faint memory of every shift you've endured. The city has changed. Regulators inspect more rigorously, customers demand purer ingredients, and a handful of forward-thinking bakers embrace the new standards. The danger hasn't vanished entirely. Flour still clouds the air, coal still smudges crusts, and the occasional lead pan lingers in forgotten corners, but survival has become more plausible. You stumble toward the end of your career, carrying scars both visible and hidden, yet oddly satisfied that some of your loaves may feed children without poisoning them. You think back to the ghosts of past shifts. Midnight hours lost to kneading dough, coughing fits in corners, faint memories of co-workers collapsing from exhaustion. You remember the tricks with alum, chalk, and lade, the smoky ovens, the relentless grind, the hunger gnawing at your ribs while you fed a city. And somehow, despite everything, you laugh. The humor is dark, twisted by survival, but it's yours. Quirky tidbits haunt your memory. Rats in ovens, coal-seasoned crusts, adulterated whiteness, but they've woven themselves into the tapestry of your life. Historians still argue whether Victorian bakers suffered the most of any trade, but you know the truth firsthand. Your body paid in full, and yet in its own stubborn way you endured. You watch apprentices arrive, bright-eyed and eager, unaware of the invisible dangers that await them. You offer advice, subtle warnings cloaked in humor, hoping they might navigate the ovens and flour dust more safely than you did. As the city moves forward, so do you. You leave behind a legacy of resilience, of loaves shaped with labor and care, of nights survived in the haze of flour and smoke. You may bear scars, but there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing the bread still rises, the ovens still roar, and somewhere families eat without harm. You trudge alongside him as a patrician household bustles around him. The walls of his home, though grander than most, are alive with the scent of burning incense, the chatter of servants, and the occasional squawk of a parrot that seems just as opinionated as the elders lecturing young Julius on duty and decorum. His family, the Julii, are prominent, yet slightly precarious in wealth and influence, a tightrope where every misstep might lead to social embarrassment or political obscurity. From the very start, Julius is no stranger to risk. You can feel it in the way he tests limits, climbing too high on temple walls, daring neighbors' children into dares that often end in a mix of laughter and minor scrapes. Even as a child, he attracts attention, not always favorable. Historians still argue whether his audacious pranks were early genius or reckless impulse, but either way, they mark him as someone who thrives on bending rules. The omens begin early. A seer reportedly tells his family he will one day face great peril, a prophecy that shadows him through adolescence. And yes, this is that moment where you might imagine Caesar squinting at the sky, muttering, "Great peril, sounds like another day in Rome." Fringe stories even claim young Julius experimented with crocodile dung as a kind of sunblock, which, if true, certainly would make his teenage friends reconsider their admiration. You can practically smell the combination of mud, incense, and dubious skincare. The city itself presses around him. Streets vibrate with merchants calling prices in clipped Latin syllables, the metallic clang of blacksmiths hammering, and the cries of slaves moving through the shadows. You stumble with him through festivals of noisy chaos, masked dancers, ritual sacrifices, and drunk citizens who could turn a birthday feast into a minor riot. And amidst all this, the young Julius is observing, cataloguing, and absorbing the textures of power. Who bends to whom, who laughs when insulted, who can be manipulated with a well-timed gift or a sharp tongue. Schooling is a chaotic affair, more survival than education. Tutors push rhetoric, Greek philosophy, and history, yet lessons are punctuated with interruptions, scuffles outside, news of political squabbles, or a sudden parade of soldiers marching through the forum. You watch him learning strategies, not just from books, but from the real, gritty world outside the villa. He begins memorizing names and faces, reading moods like open scrolls, noticing that a tilt of the head, a hesitation in speech, or a poorly timed boast can reveal more than a library of texts ever could. Family dinners are theatre, punctuated with gossip about elections, trials, and the occasional scandal. His mother, Aurelia, is both loving and politically sharp, teaching him subtleties that later fuel his rise. His uncle, Gaius Marius, offers military lore and cautionary tales. He listens, absorbs, questions, and sometimes acts with reckless bravado, testing boundaries that could get him scolded, or worse. You can almost feel the tension, the laughter, the occasional sighs at his audacity, and the faint tremor of destiny brushing against his shoulders. And yet you notice small eccentricities. Julius's love for animals, the tiny gestures of compassion for servants, and his curiosity about strange objects brought home from the marketplace. Fringe historians speculate he kept a pet lizard that he used as a conversation starter at dinner parties, a tactic to charm adults and embarrass rivals. You smile at the image, sensing that this combination of daring, cleverness, and quirks forms the foundation of a man who will one day command legions and reshape a republic. He navigates early social hierarchies with a mix of charm and cunning. By adolescence, you see him already understanding leverage, flattery when it benefits, defiance when necessary, and strategic generosity that ensures loyalty. Small contests of wit with older cousins foreshadow the battles he will later fight with generals and senators. He even practices speeches in front of mirrors, imagining applause that may or may not come, and noting reactions of any servant who happens to be observing, early audience testing that sharpens instincts for power. Even the city's festivals serve as lessons. During the Saturnalia, when roles reverse and masters serve slaves, young Julius learns how perspective can shift perception, and how public performance can be weaponized. You walk beside him as he observes everything: the laughter, the anger, the quiet whispers of envy, and the moments when someone's glance reveals more than words ever could. Here, history seeps into the marrow. Every ritual, every joke, every scolding becomes fodder for the man he will become. By the time adolescence yields to the early stirrings of adulthood, you feel the transformation. That mischievous boy, audacious and curious, now carries the weight of inherited expectations, a glimmering ambition, and a sense that destiny, real or imagined, is calling. You sense that every minor scuffle, every prank, and every whispered warning in the streets of Rome is shaping a figure who will not only survive but dominate. And as you trudge home with him, mud-caked sandals slapping cobblestones, you realize the early Roman cityscape, the smells, the chaos, the lessons, is itself a crucible forging a future dictator, general, and legend. You trudge alongside young Julius as adolescence bleeds into the raw, sweaty arena of Roman politics. The city no longer seems like a playground, but a jungle of power brokers, gossiping senators, and rival families. The streets smell sharper now, a mix of sweat, burnt oil, and the metallic tang of ambition. You probably won't survive this labyrinth without tripping over a scandal or getting trampled by an unexpected alliance, but that's precisely where Caesar thrives, right at the intersection of chaos and opportunity. Early on, you witness him navigating the patrician circles, learning which gestures signal submission and which spark envy. His charm is lethal. He smiles just enough, listens just enough, and laughs just the right amount. Historians still argue whether his rise stemmed from sheer personal magnetism or a cunning ability to manipulate perception, but you, walking beside him, can feel the magnetism working in real time. Caesar befriends the right mentors, quietly studies the habits of rivals, and never underestimates the value of a well-timed compliment or a whispered warning. Public games and festivals double as political arenas. You follow him into the forum, where speeches clash with cries from merchants and senators maneuver like gladiators. Fringe tales suggest young Caesar once bribed a street performer to distract a rival during a heated debate, which, if true, is both hilarious and terrifying. You notice that the applause he seeks is never just for entertainment. It's a test, a measure of influence, and a rehearsal for the stage of history he's building toward. Family continues to be both anchor and challenge. His mother, Aurelia, offers guidance with a stern affection, while his uncle Gaius Marius provides cautionary military tales that linger like shadows on his ambitions. You watch as Caesar absorbs these dual influences, the emotional intelligence of Aurelia, the strategic thinking of Marius, and the occasional spark of rebellion when expectations clash with instinct. Every family dinner, every whispered counsel, is another rehearsal for a public life that demands both tact and audacity. You also trudge through the grittier side of Roman politics. Bribery, alliances, and even small acts of intimidation are the tools of the game. Caesar witnesses street brawls between client families, learns when to intervene and when to step back. Fringe sources suggest he once staged a mock kidnapping to expose a political rival's cowardice, an audacious maneuver that would later foreshadow the bold risks of his military campaigns. Historians still argue whether these early political stunts were reckless or a masterclass in strategic theater, but walking with him, you feel the careful calculation behind each move. Education merges seamlessly with political observation. You see him practicing rhetoric in dusty libraries, polishing arguments, and experimenting with gestures that could sway a crowd. Tutors push Greek philosophy and Roman law, yet Caesar seems less interested in rote learning than in the art of persuasion, the subtle gestures, and the timing of words that can alter careers or fortunes. Even the mundane act of walking through the city becomes a lesson. Observing reactions, knotting alliances, and mentally cataloguing who could be a friend or a threat. Despite the growing seriousness, there are quirks that make Caesar undeniably human. He collects small curiosities from the streets, odd coins, tiny sculptures, and exotic trinkets from traders. Fringe accounts suggest he even kept a small collection of dead insects, each pinned carefully as a metaphorical reminder of impermanence and ambition. You walk with him through crowded markets and empty temples, feeling the strange juxtaposition of youthful fascination and political calculation. Public life teaches him patience, but also audacity. He watches elections, trials, and tribunals with the curiosity of a scholar and the instinct of a predator. He learns to balance risk with reward, when to speak, when to remain silent, and when a dramatic gesture could shift opinion entirely. You sense that every awkward pause in a courtroom, every strategic bribe, and every whispered compliment is carefully recorded in his mind, ready to be deployed when opportunity knocks, and it will. Even minor roles, like serving on minor committees or escorting dignitaries, are tests of wit and endurance. You follow him as he observes subtle power plays, a senator's hesitation, a tribune's bravado, a clerk's nervous twitch. These observations, minor as they seem, are the scaffolding for later mastery. Fringe historians suggest he once feigned illness to avoid a risky vote, then emerged days later with a cleverly timed proposal that won him both allies and enemies. You see the lessons being etched. Life in Rome is a game of chess, and Caesar already knows most of the moves. By the end of this period, you feel his transformation from mischievous boy to politically shrewd young man. Streets, courts, and forums have become classrooms. Allies, rivals, and even indifferent citizens have become instruments in a symphony of power that Caesar is beginning to orchestrate. As you walk through the clamor and chaos, you realize that every word spoken, every gesture observed, and every minor triumph is preparing him for something far larger, a life that will be written in bold letters across history, long before he ever wields a sword on a battlefield. You trudge alongside Caesar as the cobblestones of Rome fade behind him and the horizon opens to the foreign lands of Asia Minor and Spain, where the scent of unfamiliar spices, the tang of river mud, and the metallic echo of clashing swords become the new constant. This is no stroll through the forum anymore. This is the raw, brutal education of a soldier and emerging general. You probably won't survive the chaos of marching legions and skirmishes without grimacing at the unpredictability, yet Caesar seems almost to thrive in it, absorbing every lesson like a sponge soaked in blood, dust, and ambition. His first military assignments are technically minor, often administrative or observational, yet they offer him a backstage pass to the machinery of Roman warfare. You watch him shadow veteran commanders, learning how to move troops, negotiate with local leaders, and read the temperament of soldiers. Historians still argue whether his early campaigns were remarkable due to innate genius or simply a combination of opportunity and ambition. But being here, shoulder to shoulder with him, you feel the magnetic pull of his presence over men already hardened by war. Battles arrive unexpectedly. The clang of metal, the screams of horses, and the sharp, acrid smoke of burning villages become your constant companions. Caesar quickly learns that victories hinge not just on strategy, but on morale, speed, and a hint of daring recklessness. Fringe tales claim that he once personally led a charge against a fortified hill with only a handful of soldiers, forcing the enemy into retreat through sheer audacity, or perhaps just calculated bravado. You can feel the tension in each step, the careful counting of archers and cavalry, the restless impatience of young ambition. Diplomacy is another battlefield. You trudge alongside him into villages where locals watch the Roman presence with suspicion, curiosity, and occasional hostility. Caesar studies body language, gauges loyalty, and negotiates with the cunning of a seasoned merchant, even while the threat of rebellion lingers. You notice the careful combination of carrot and stick, gifts, assurances, and sometimes the subtle threat of military might. It's a delicate dance that will shape his understanding of leadership in ways Rome itself has not yet demanded. The day-to-day of military life is grueling. Marches stretch for hours across sun-scorched plains, rivers, and forests where food is scarce and tempers fray. Soldiers grumble, terrain bites, and disease spreads silently. You trudge beside him, feeling the sweat-soaked tunics, the blisters forming, and the gnawing hunger. And yet Caesar endears himself to his men, distributing rations, offering encouragement, and demonstrating skill and courage that earns loyalty. Fringe accounts even suggest he slept with a dagger beneath his pillow, just in case, a habit that likely reassured and intimidated at the same time. The political mind never rests, even amidst the cacophony of battle. Caesar observes hierarchies among his fellow commanders, rivalries simmering like hidden coals, and the subtle manipulations that can elevate a man or destroy him. You watch as he juggles orders, intelligence reports, and the morale of his troops, learning to improvise when plans falter. Historians still argue whether his success in these campaigns was inevitable or a mix of daring improvisation and luck, but standing here, you feel the calculated precision behind each decision. Sieges provide a different kind of lesson. You trudge with him along battered walls, witnessing both strategy and desperation. Engineers construct ramps, ladders, and catapults, while soldiers endure endless hours of stifling heat and fear. Caesar is relentless in observing weak points, predicting enemy reactions, and sometimes taking personal risks that unsettle even seasoned officers. Fringe tales whisper that he once disguised himself as a common soldier to gauge loyalty and morale among the ranks, a stunt both reckless and revealing. Beyond combat, you notice the small eccentricities that hint at his personality. He collects coins, keeps meticulous journals, and even examines local flora and fauna with curious intensity. One story suggests he developed a taste for a rare Spanish wine that he smuggled back to Rome in small flasks, much to the delight of his friends and the confusion of purists. These details, trivial at first glance, reveal a man who absorbs culture, geography, and human behavior as if the world itself were a classroom. The campaigns teach logistics and leadership in equal measure. You feel the strain of supplying armies across rivers and mountains, negotiating with local populations, and maintaining cohesion when weather, disease, or rebellion threaten collapse. Every misstep becomes a lesson, how to inspire loyalty, how to punish just enough to maintain discipline, and how to inspire awe in both soldiers and civilians. Caesar's mind is constantly ticking, mapping every consequence, noting every opportunity for leverage, and observing reactions like a scholar taking field notes. By the end of these early campaigns, you sense the transformation. Julius Caesar, the boy of patrician pranks and forum antics, has become a strategist in miniature, learning the mechanics of warfare, diplomacy, and leadership under the harshest conditions. You can almost feel the future general shaping within him, the same man who will later command legions, cross the Rubicon, and bend the destiny of Rome itself. Every village burned, every alliance brokered, and every skirmish fought is a brick in the foundation of the legend he is becoming. And as you trudge alongside him, mud-caked and wary, you realize that history is being written one march, one battle, and one clever negotiation at a time. You trudge with Caesar into Gaul, and the landscape itself feels alive. Dense forests that swallow sunlight, rivers that churn with mystery, and villages perched on hills like secrets waiting to be uncovered. The air smells of damp earth, smoke from village hearths, and the sharp tang of iron from Roman weapons. You probably won't survive these endless campaigns without a crick in your neck, a blister on your foot, or an occasional shiver of fear. But that's exactly the environment that sharpens Caesar's mind and hones his ambition. From the start, he approaches Gaul not merely as a theatre of conquest, but as a living experiment in strategy, governance, and human behavior. You watch him study the tribes, patterns, alliances, and rivalries as if they were chapters in a book he intends to master. Historians still argue whether his writings on the Gallic Wars exaggerate his victories or reflect a meticulous record, but walking beside him, you sense a keen observer translating chaos into order, calculating risk and reward with each march and skirmish. Battles are relentless. You trudge through mud-soaked fields, hear the clash of swords, the roar of charging cavalry, and the panicked cries of villagers caught between armies. Fringe tales suggest he once staged a mock naval attack on a river, merely to intimidate an entire tribe into surrender, a demonstration of psychological warfare that borders on theatrical genius. Caesar's tactics often blend ingenuity and audacity: surprise attacks, fortifications constructed overnight, and rapid movements that bewilder his opponents. Sieges teach both patience and audacity. You watch him circle fortresses, build towering ramps, and manipulate terrain to his advantage. Soldiers grumble under the endless labor, but Caesar moves among them, distributing rations, offering encouragement, and sometimes demonstrating a personal courage that borders on recklessness. Fringe accounts whisper that he once slept under the open sky with enemy scouts nearby, testing their loyalty and response time, a dangerous experiment in leadership and psychology. Beyond the battlefield, Caesar studies the culture of Gaul. You observe him knotting religious rituals, ceremonial dress, and even culinary customs. He collects artifacts, records observations in meticulous journals, and sometimes surprises locals with small gestures of diplomacy, a shared meal, a respectful bow, or a gift of trinkets from distant Rome. These actions, seemingly minor, weave the thread of influence, ensuring that fear and respect coexist among the tribes. Campaigns are grueling. You trudge over rain-slick hills, through forests where wolves howl at night, and along rivers that swell with sudden storms. Logistics are a constant challenge. Food, weapons, and communication must reach the front lines without delay. Caesar learns to innovate, improvising solutions where necessity demands. Fringe historians suggest he once engineered a floating bridge of boats to outflank an enemy, a move that impressed soldiers and terrified opponents alike. Historians still argue whether his victories stemmed more from clever strategy or sheer audacity, but witnessing it firsthand, you see the careful orchestration behind each maneuver. The human element dominates just as much as terrain. You watch Caesar manage the morale of his men, navigate mutinies, and negotiate with local leaders. Loyalty is earned, fear is wielded, and alliances are fragile. Every gesture, every speech, every ordered march is a lesson in authority and influence. Fringe tales even suggest he used a pet raven to relay signals during one particularly chaotic siege, an eccentric touch that somehow worked. He also encounters personal danger repeatedly. Ambushes, treachery, and unpredictable weather push both him and his soldiers to the edge. You trudge through mud and blood, feeling the tension as Caesar leads from the front, inspiring confidence while risking life and limb. His audacity earns devotion, and stories of his exploits spread among the legions and local tribes alike, creating a legend even before it reaches Rome. The Gallic campaigns are not just military triumphs, they are a laboratory for power. You watch him test strategies, observe human nature, and refine leadership under extreme conditions. Small victories, clever maneuvers, and personal bravery compound into a reputation that begins to overshadow all previous accomplishments. Historians still argue whether his conquest of Gaul was inevitable, but you feel the precision, planning and risk-taking that make success not just likely but extraordinary. By the end of these years, Caesar has transformed Gaul into a canvas of his genius. You trudge past rivers and forests now familiar, villages either allied or subdued, and a legion inspired by its general's cunning and audacity. The landscape of Gaul, once mysterious and wild, is now mapped in his mind, every obstacle and opportunity catalogued. You sense that every clever maneuver, every diplomatic nuance, and every daring attack is forging not only a brilliant military leader, but a man poised to change the course of history. Remember the early lessons in Rome, the pranks, the forums, the ambition. They echo here, amplified across battlefields and rivers, shaping the legend of Julius Caesar in real time. You trudge alongside Caesar as the forested hills of Gaul give way to the familiar yet charged streets of Rome, now tense with anticipation. The air feels electric, carrying whispers of politics, fear, and the scent of opportunity. You probably won't survive the tension without a knot in your stomach, but Caesar strides forward with that unmistakable mixture of audacity and calculation. Crossing the Rubicon isn't just a geographic act. It's a statement, a challenge, and a moment where destiny and hubris collide, all while Roman citizens murmur and politicians clutch their togas nervously. Historians still argue whether Caesar truly believed he was guided by fate, or if he simply loved the drama of seizing history by the throat. Walking beside him, you feel both perspectives. There's a pause in the chill morning air, the river sparkling deceptively calm, as if aware that it is about to witness an irreversible act. Caesar's soldiers, loyal yet anxious, form ranks behind him. Fringe tales suggest he offered a handful of coins to local fishermen, ensuring they wouldn't report his crossing, a tiny, clever move that epitomizes his mix of boldness and pragmatism. The act itself is surreal. You trudge through shallow waters, the current tugging at your sandals, the reflections of dawn trembling across the ripples. The river, modest yet symbolic, holds centuries of Roman imagination and lore. To cross it with a legion is treason, to hesitate is weakness. Caesar's words reportedly echo in the minds of all present. The die is cast. You feel that thrill, the dangerous excitement of a man consciously stepping into irreversible consequences, knowing there is no turning back. Citizens on the banks watch in fear and curiosity. Some whisper curses, others hope for justice, and a few recognize the magnitude of what is unfolding. Caesar, ever aware of perception, uses the moment to consolidate psychological advantage. His soldiers move with measured confidence, his presence commanding respect, and every glance and gesture broadcasts both authority and inevitability. Fringe stories suggest he even allowed a small child to witness the crossing, symbolizing hope or fate, or perhaps just to impress onlookers with his calculated human touch. Rome's political apparatus is already rattling. You feel the tremor of panic among senators who now realize that history may no longer be dictated from the marble halls of the Senate. Rival generals exchange anxious glances, unsure whether to negotiate, resist, or flee. Caesar's crossing ignites a cascade of actions. Letters are dispatched, allegiances reconsidered, and rumors ripple through the city faster than the morning breeze. Historians still argue whether the Senate could have contained him had they acted decisively, but in that moment, the initiative belongs to Caesar. Military strategy unfolds with both elegance and raw force. You trudge through surrounding territories, noting how Caesar positions his forces with meticulous care, anticipating enemy reactions and exploiting weaknesses. His early campaigns in Italy are marked by rapid maneuvers, clever use of terrain, and psychological operations designed to undermine opponents before swords clash. Fringe accounts suggest he once staged a fake retreat to lure a rival into a trap, an audacious gambit that worked perfectly, demonstrating his flair for deception and spectacle. The human element is just as crucial. Soldiers, though weary from previous campaigns, are inspired by Caesar's personal bravery and sharp leadership. You witness him sharing rations, offering encouragement, and sometimes confronting danger directly, reinforcing loyalty and admiration. Fringe anecdotes claim he once debated an enemy commander under temporary truce, negotiating terms while subtly intimidating his counterpart, a mix of charisma, intellect, and psychological warfare. Rome itself is a living, breathing test of power. You follow him as he navigates cities, fortresses, and roads teeming with uncertainty. Citizens, accustomed to political ritual, suddenly confront the immediacy of conflict, and Caesar understands this tension, using it to consolidate influence. He is both participant and observer, a man turning every glance, gesture, and whispered rumor into actionable intelligence. Historians still argue whether his crossing of the Rubicon was reckless or the calculated pivot that cemented his path to dictatorship. But standing here, the audacity and precision of the act are undeniable. Every step forward is a declaration. The Republic as it existed is in flux. You feel the weight of history pressing down with each mile, the tension between loyalty and law, ambition and tradition, freedom and control. Caesar's decisions ripple outward, influencing soldiers, citizens, and rival politicians alike. Fringe historians suggest he may have even consulted an astrologer before crossing, seeking celestial approval for what would become one of the most dramatic acts in history. By the time Rome appears fully in view, the river behind you shimmering with reflection and consequence, the significance of the moment settles in. You realize that this march is not just about territory, it's about destiny, risk, and the irreversibility of choice. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon marks the transition from general to statesman, from ambitious soldier to historical actor whose decisions will echo through centuries. As you trudge beside him, the riverbank fadding behind, you sense the weight of inevitability. Rome will never be the same, and neither will you. You trudge with Caesar through the streets of Rome now fully under his influence, the city both familiar and alien, thrumming with nervous energy, whispered debates, and the scent of freshly turned marble and burning oil. You probably won't survive the dizzying mix of ceremonies, reforms, and political theatre without feeling vertigo from ambition itself. Yet Caesar moves with a certainty that transforms chaos into opportunity. Every glance, every whisper, every rumor is a tool, and he wields them with precision, whether reforming laws or subtly rearranging the delicate balance of power. Historians still argue whether Caesar's reforms were genuinely visionary or a clever means to consolidate authority, but walking beside him, you feel the careful calculation in every decree. Streets once congested with disorganized merchants now host regulated markets. Grain shortages are mitigated with careful redistribution, and the city's infrastructure bends under his subtle hand, improving while simultaneously reinforcing loyalty. Fringe tales suggest he consulted astrologers before passing major legislation, blending superstition and politics in a uniquely Roman cocktail. You notice his daily interactions with the populace, always performative yet effective. He attends public games, listens to grievances, and disperses favors with an almost theatrical timing. Soldiers, freedmen, and patricians alike see him as a figure who combines charisma, intellect, and the aura of inevitability. Every gesture is deliberate, a hand on a shoulder, a knowing glance, a carefully staged appearance that whispers, "I am Rome incarnate." Fringe accounts even suggest he kept a pet raven to send messages across the city, quaint, clever, and a touch theatrical. Legal reforms dominate much of his attention. You trudge through tribunals as he revises laws, emphasizing fairness, efficiency, and control. Courts become arenas where Caesar's influence is felt, subtly guiding outcomes while appearing impartial. Historians still argue whether these legal changes genuinely benefited the common people or primarily cemented Caesar's authority, but walking beside him, you sense the duality, public service entwined with personal power. Caesar's calendar reforms are another signature achievement. You follow him as he debates astronomers and priests, reconciling lunar and solar cycles, adjusting leap years, and ensuring the new Julian calendar aligns with both civic and religious life. Fringe anecdotes suggest he once staged a small festival to distract skeptics while introducing calendar changes, brilliant political theatre disguised as cultural celebration. The city begins to adapt, rhythms of daily life subtly altered under the gentle insistence of his hand. Personal security and loyalty remain crucial. You notice Caesar's careful monitoring of both allies and potential rivals. Conversations in the forum, letters from distant provinces, and seemingly minor gestures are all catalogued and assessed. Fringe tales whisper that he once feigned illness to gauge the loyalty of a senator, revealing friend from foe in a single calculated act. Historians still debate whether these measures were paranoia or necessary precaution, but you see the logic. In a city where power is transient, foresight is survival. Urban infrastructure also transforms under his watch. Roads are repaired, aqueducts improved, and public buildings maintained with a new rigor. You trudge alongside work crews, observing Caesar inspecting progress with an eye for detail, correcting errors and rewarding ingenuity. Fringe sources suggest he sometimes disguised himself to walk among laborers, noting their true opinions and attitudes without the filter of ceremony. A man who understands that information is power at every level. Cultural influence is subtly woven into his reforms. You watch him patronize poets, philosophers, and artists, not merely for prestige but to shape public perception. Festivals, public performances, and games are calibrated to inspire admiration and loyalty. Fringe stories claim he once staged a mock naval battle on a flooded square in Rome, dramatic, ridiculous, and effective in reminding citizens of both his reach and ingenuity. Historians still argue whether these cultural maneuvers were political genius or extravagant showmanship, but the effect on Rome is palpable. You also see the human side behind the reforms. Caesar interacts warmly with friends, occasionally indulging in humor and minor eccentricities. His personal habits, late-night walks, careful journaling, and even occasional solitary meals by candlelight reveal a man who balances public authority with private reflection. Fringe accounts suggest he had a curious obsession with exotic spices, sending envoys abroad to secure rare ingredients, blending personal indulgence with a subtle assertion of influence. By the end of this period, you realize Caesar's Rome is both transformed and consolidating. The city's streets, laws, and rhythms bend under his hand, creating a network of loyalty, influence, and efficiency. You feel the pulse of power as tangible, almost palpable. Every citizen, soldier, and senator becomes part of a living organism that he guides with a mixture of charisma, intellect, and audacious calculation. Walking beside him, you sense the subtle artistry of governance, the careful orchestration of perception, and the preparation for challenges that loom just beyond the city gates. Caesar is no longer simply a general. He is the architect of Rome's destiny, and every reform, gesture, and eccentricity adds another brushstroke to a portrait that will endure far beyond his lifetime. You trudge beside Caesar as personal life intertwines with public spectacle, and Rome's streets become stages for both scandal and fascination. The air hums with gossip, perfume, and the faint tang of inked letters. You probably won't survive this tangle of marriages, affairs, and whispers without raising an eyebrow, but Caesar moves through it like a master choreographer, balancing desire, ambition, and perception with casual elegance. Marriages are political as much as personal. You observe him navigating alliances through matrimony, each union carefully calculated to strengthen influence and consolidate power. His first marriage to Cornelia, daughter of a prominent populist family, anchors him in Rome's social and political currents. Historians still argue whether these early unions were motivated more by love or strategic calculation, but walking beside him, you notice the delicate interplay between affection, duty, and advantage. Fringe tales suggest Cornelia once staged a minor rebellion within their household simply to test his patience, a quirky domestic counterpoint to his grand public ambitions. You also witness Caesar's famed liaison with Cleopatra across the Mediterranean. The queen's charisma is formidable, and the political and romantic entanglements are complex. Fringe anecdotes hint at elaborate gifts exchanged, perfumed oils, rare silks, and exotic pets. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra genuinely influenced Caesar's policies or whether their relationship is magnified by legend, but observing their interactions, you sense a genuine mix of mutual fascination, ambition, and playful rivalry. Scandals ripple through Rome. You trudge along as whispers of affairs, rumors of bribery, and gossip about unusual habits follow him like shadows. Citizens, servants, and politicians speculate endlessly, creating a backdrop of tension and intrigue that Caesar navigates with effortless composure. Fringe sources suggest he once commissioned a comedy mocking a rival senator's domestic indiscretions, blending humor with political strategy in a way that is audacious yet effective. Children and heirs enter the stage. You watch as Caesar mentors his son and extended family, teaching lessons both subtle and overt about influence, perception, and strategy. These interactions reveal a softer, more intimate side to a man often defined by public grandeur. Fringe tales suggest he had a habit of whispering cryptic advice to children, perhaps to test their wit, perhaps to imprint the importance of observation and cunning, a personal legacy interwoven with political training. Public appearances remain a theater of influence. You trudge beside him as he attends festivals, speeches, and religious ceremonies, blending personal flair with calculated display. You notice small gestures that convey power without overt aggression, a deliberate pause before speaking, a meaningful glance, or the casual yet strategic distribution of favors. Historians still argue whether his charisma alone was enough to sway crowds, or whether the political structures he manipulated were the true engines of influence. Even leisure reflects strategy. You observe him hunting, attending banquets, and hosting friends in villa gardens, always with an undercurrent of observation. Fringe accounts suggest he once staged a mock trial of a favorite slave during a dinner party to gauge loyalty and cleverness among guests, an eccentric blend of entertainment and subtle testing of character. You can almost smell the roasting meats and hear the soft laughter, punctuated by tension and curiosity, as Caesar orchestrates each social encounter. Financial maneuvering threads through personal relationships. You notice his careful management of inheritances, gifts, and patronage. Wealth is not merely for indulgence. It is leverage, influence, and security. Fringe stories hint he once gave a rare gem to a client in exchange for intelligence on rival senators, a subtle reminder that even pleasure can be practical. You also trudge through moments of introspection. Despite the glamour and intrigue, private letters, late-night walks, and solitary reflection reveal a man aware of his vulnerabilities, his ambitions, and the fleeting nature of influence. Fringe anecdotes even claim he occasionally consulted dreams and omens before making personal decisions, blending superstition with strategy in a uniquely Caesarean way. By the end of this chapter of his life, you realize the intimate and political are inseparable. Marriage, romance, scandal, and family are not diversions. They are instruments of power, arenas for observation, and lessons in human behavior. Walking beside him, you sense the careful choreography behind every gesture, conversation, and affair. Each relationship, whether tender, strategic, or scandalous, sharpens his understanding of influence, loyalty, and desire, a mastery of human nature that will serve as both shield and sword in the tumultuous years ahead. You trudge with Caesar through the marble corridors of the Senate, the air thick with tension, candle smoke, and the faint metallic scent of fear. The Ides of March loom, and you probably won't survive the conspiratorial whispers and furtive glances without feeling the prickling unease of impending betrayal. Every step echoes in the hall, every murmur is a potential dagger, and Caesar moves through it with a mixture of awareness, casual grace, and that signature audacity that has carried him through campaigns and political storms alike. Historians still argue whether Caesar sensed the conspiracy forming or whether the omens were simply ignored in the momentum of power, but walking beside him, you notice subtle gestures, tense pauses, and moments of hesitation that suggest an almost imperceptible awareness of danger. Fringe tailies claim he once dreamt of statues bleeding in the Forum, a premonition he brushed off with a wry smile and a shrug blending superstition with pragmatic dismissal. The Senate itself is a theater of deception and manipulation. You follow him past senators in togas whispering among themselves, their eyes flicking nervously, their hands twitching toward concealed daggers or incriminating documents. Caesar's presence dominates, not through volume but through the magnetic pull of charisma, intellect, and the aura of inevitability. Fringe accounts even suggest he had a subtle hand signal for loyal allies to identify and protect him, a quiet chess move amidst the political melee. The conspirators are meticulous. You trudge alongside Caesar as they plot, balancing caution with aggression, each member motivated by fear, envy, or idealism. Even as whispers swirl, Caesar maintains composure, shaking hands, acknowledging speeches, and projecting a calm that belies the storm gathering in secret chambers. Historians still debate whether he underestimated the threat or merely accepted fate with a calculated stoicism, but standing here, the tension is palpable and nearly suffocating. The atmosphere is ceremonial yet charged with lethal intent. You can almost hear the faint scrape of hidden blades against leather, the nervous shift of a senator's feet, and the quiet exchange of coded glances. Fringe tailies suggest one conspirator reportedly rehearsed the stabbing in miniature on a wax figure, a mix of paranoia and morbid fascination that hints at the obsessive focus of those involved. Caesar's routine gestures, greeting a colleague, adjusting his toga, smiling at a familiar face, become rehearsed armor, an almost imperceptible shield against the inevitability of human treachery. Even mundane interactions are fraught with danger. You trudge beside him as he listens to petitions, receives envoys, and engages in seemingly trivial debates, each a subtle test of loyalty and awareness. Caesar catalogues everything: tone of voice, hesitation, body language, and fleeting expressions, turning every minor interaction into intelligence. Fringe accounts suggest he once quietly slipped a personal note to a trusted aide, predicting the precise moment of betrayal, a tiny act of foresight that underscores his relentless preparation. Religious and superstitious currents swirl alongside political ones. Augurs, omens, and whispered prophecies intermingle with debates over legislation and personal ambitions. Caesar navigates these seamlessly, acknowledging the symbolic power without surrendering rational control. Fringe historians suggest he may have privately consulted a soothsayer on the day of the Ides, blending ancient rituals with strategic awareness, a fusion of superstition and practical cunning. The fateful day arrives with deceptive calm. You trudge with him through the familiar route to the Senate, the streets of Rome carrying the usual hum of merchants, citizens, and animals, masking the deadly precision of the conspiracy in motion. Senators cluster, gestures are rehearsed, and the weight of history presses with a quiet inevitability. Caesar's presence commands attention, yet there is no bravado, only the calm execution of habit and subtle awareness of forces converging. The attack, swift and shocking, unfolds with a rhythm both terrifying and almost choreographed. You feel the tension, the abrupt movement, and the awareness that centuries of reputation and legacy hinge on moments measured in heartbeats. Fringe tailies whisper that he may have sensed betrayal in a dream that very morning, a premonition that tinges the scene with eerie inevitability. Historians still argue whether his death could have been avoided through precaution, or if destiny itself had scripted this moment. By the end of this day, the corridors of the Senate are silent, the air heavy with fear, grief, and stunned realization. You trudge through the aftermath, noting the chaos, the scrambling of senators, and the stunned citizens outside. Caesar's fall is a shockwave, instantaneous yet echoing across time, shaping Rome in ways both immediate and enduring. Walking amidst the ruins of certainty, you sense that this moment, while fatal to the man, marks the birth of legend, the crystallization of audacity and foresight into a story that will be told for millennia. You trudge through the chaos of Rome in the immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination, the city both familiar and transformed, filled with smoke, whispered fear, and the distant clatter of hurried sandals. You probably won't survive the swirl of panic, rumor, and grief without feeling dizzy from the whirlwind of human emotion. Yet every street, every forum, every villa hums with the consequences of a single act. The Ides of March have passed, but the echoes of betrayal, ambition, and audacity resonate as if the city itself is holding its breath. Historians still argue whether Caesar's reforms and vision would have endured without his death, but walking alongside the stunned senators, soldiers, and citizens, you see the immediate impact. The delicate balance of power fractures, alliances scramble, and the once commanding figure now exists in legend as much as memory. Fringe tales suggest that even immediately after the assassination, a loyal slave secretly preserved Caesar's personal notes and journals, a tiny thread that will feed the narrative of his genius for centuries. You observe the chaos in the forum, where loyalists, opportunists, and terrified citizens collide. The streets are punctuated with hurried commands, frantic couriers, and whispers of vengeance. Caesar's supporters attempt to maintain order while mourners gather in quiet clusters, some openly weeping, others silently calculating next steps. Fringe accounts even hint that a few soldiers wept not for grief, but out of awe, recognizing that a figure of unparalleled ambition and intellect had been struck down by envy and fear. Political ripples surge through Rome. You trudge beside embittered senators plotting to consolidate authority, tribunes cautiously protecting their factions, and citizens who feel both relief and unease. Caesar's absence leaves a vacuum, and every decision now carries heightened consequence. Historians still debate whether the conspirators fully understood the destabilization they had unleashed, or whether their actions were a short-sighted attempt to preserve tradition against overwhelming change. Legacies begin to crystallize even as mourning continues. You see statues draped in cloth, speeches that memorialize and vilify, and coins subtly altered to reflect both fear and hope. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some artisans secretly carved Caesar's likeness into private homes, a silent homage that coexists with public condemnation. You feel the tension of a city suspended between grief and the unsteady momentum of political recalibration. The military reacts with cautious loyalty. You trudge alongside legions that had once marched under Caesar's command, now uncertain whether to avenge him, support emerging leaders, or retreat into self-preservation. Fringe stories suggest some units initially refused orders until Caesar's will, interpreted through letters and notes, could be clarified, a testament to both discipline and the enduring power of his authority. You also see the ripple effects on the populace. Merchants, farmers, and artisans whisper in crowded markets and quiet alleys, speculating on who will rise, who will fall, and how daily life will shift. Caesar's assassination becomes a story told alongside the clatter of daily survival, blending legend with lived experience. Fringe tales even suggest that a street performer recounted the assassination in dramatic pantomime the very next day, a blend of theater and rumor that cements narrative before official accounts emerge. In the political arena, power consolidates slowly yet inexorably. You trudge past the Senate as factions jockey, alliances realign, and the seeds of future civil wars are planted. Historians still argue whether the resulting chaos could have been mitigated, or was inevitable given the structures of Roman governance and the void left by Caesar's absence. Every whispered plot, every careful negotiation, and every bold assertion of authority is a direct consequence of the Ides of March. Cultural memory begins to entwine with political reality. You notice graffiti, inscriptions, and murmured poetry that oscillate between mourning, anger, and admiration. Caesar's death is already larger than life, a lesson in ambition, hubris, and the fragility of power. Fringe accounts suggest that even months later, citizens were placing small tokens at altars in his honor, blending superstition, mourning, and reverence, a recognition that some legacies outlived the man himself. By the time the city begins to settle, you trudge through a Rome that is both recovering and transforming. Caesar's physical presence is gone, but his influence persists in every law, every soldier, every whisper of ambition. You sense that the assassination, while fatal, only amplifies the legend, shaping narratives, political dynamics, and cultural memory in ways that will resonate for centuries. Walking through the streets, observing the interplay of grief, fear, and strategy, You realize that Caesar's immediate legacy is as much about what he enabled others to react to as it is about the man himself, a paradox that will define his historical presence long after the dust of betrayal settles. You trudge through the Rome that now breathes with the weight of Caesar's absence, yet pulses with the resonance of his life, victories, and vision. The city streets feel smaller, heavier, charged with whispered fear and awe, and you probably won't survive the enormity of legacy and consequence without feeling both the thrill and the chill of history. Everywhere you turn, you see the imprint of a man whose life reshaped the Republic. Monuments, statues, coins, and stories that weave a tapestry of audacity, intellect, and relentless ambition. Historians still argue whether Caesar's ultimate goal was absolute power or genuine reform, but walking through Rome, the evidence is inescapable. Laws enacted, infrastructure strengthened, and a citizenry both terrified and inspired. Fringe tales suggest that even decades later, some households kept his letters tucked away, reverently hidden, a private connection to genius that transcended mortality. You trudge past the remnants of the Senate, now reeling from the vacuum of authority, and feel the echoes of debates, conspiracies, and courage that defined a life lived at the absolute extremes of possibility. You witness the rise of the Second Triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, who maneuver through the political landscape Caesar left behind. Streets and forums throng with soldiers and citizens, some mourning, some scheming, all aware that the world has shifted irrevocably. Fringe anecdotes suggest that Octavian would later walk the same routes you traverse now, consciously mapping the spaces where Caesar had tread, a symbolic and practical act of claiming both memory and authority. The social and cultural legacy pulses through Rome. Festivals, public games, and theatrical performances increasingly celebrate or critique Caesar's memory. Citizens whisper anecdotes of his early pranks, audacious campaigns, and even quirks like the rumored crocodile dung sunblock from youth, an enduring reminder that the man was human as well as monumental. Historians still debate whether these stories were exaggerated to mythologize Caesar or genuinely reflect the eccentric genius of his character, but you can feel their weight in every shared glance and whispered tale. Military structures remain transformed. You trudge past legions once led by Caesar, now loyal to successors who claim continuity, yet inspired by the memory of audacity and strategic brilliance. Fringe stories suggest some veterans place small tokens on his statues, a gesture blending superstition, nostalgia, and reverence. You sense that every maneuver, every training exercise, every march across Italy carries traces of the lessons Caesar imparted, tangible and intangible. Even ordinary citizens feel the ripple of his life. Markets, temples, and homes hum with stories, whispered memories of generosity, daring, or scandal, echoes of reforms that shaped daily survival, lessons of observation and influence that the populace unconsciously internalizes. You trudge past vendors selling figurines, poets reciting exploits, and children playing at being generals, seeing in their mimicry the enduring power of example. Political maneuvering intensifies. You witness Octavian and Antony consolidating power, negotiating alliances, and subtly erasing or emphasizing legacies. Fringe accounts suggest that statues of Caesar were occasionally repositioned or adorned to signal allegiance, blending propaganda with homage. Historians still argue whether the triumvirate honored Caesar's vision or manipulated it for personal gain, but you feel the magnetic pull of his influence on every move. Rome's architecture and infrastructure bear his mark. Roads, aqueducts, and civic buildings remain, silent testaments to ambition and foresight. You trudge across bridges he improved, past temples he influenced, and through forums where laws he passed still govern commerce and debate. Fringe tales suggest that even a minor fountain in the city was subtly redesigned under his direction, blending utility with a symbolic gesture of order and authority. The human element endures. Caesar's friends, enemies, family, and proteges continue navigating the consequences of his life, each action a reflection or rebuttal of his audacity. You observe letters, alliances, and minor intrigues that trace back to his decisions, seeing clearly that his influence persists in choices, conversations, and human behavior. Historians still argue whether this continued turbulence was inevitable or a direct consequence of his extraordinary ambition, but walking among these threads, you feel the intricacy of cause and effect. As dusk falls over Rome, you trudge through streets softened by fading light and the hum of distant activity. The city feels alive, haunted, and inspired simultaneously. Every monument, story, and rumor speaks to the life of a man who transformed everything he touched, blending intellect, audacity, and human eccentricity. Caesar's legacy, paradoxical and profound, remains woven into Rome's very fabric, a constant reminder that ambition, courage, and cunning, coupled with an uncanny ability to observe and adapt, can reshape the world. You feel it in the softened whispers of citizens, the silent discipline of soldiers, and the enduring power of a name that will echo through centuries. History is no longer abstract. It is tangible, felt in cobblestones, echoes, and the subtle interplay of life that continues long after the man himself has gone.